Welcome, Maggie Jones Boyle.
Welcome. Thank you for having me.
Welcome, thank you. So you are listening to TAP, and I've tried to get this habit of saying TAP rather than Therapeutic Astrology podcast. But today, maybe we need to clarify it is actually about therapy and astrology, because I've asked you, Maggie, to join me for a conversation about this sacred work of combining the two, or at least working with the two modalities of therapy and astrology. And I'm excited to hear how you do that. But I want to start somewhere else. I'd like to know how you came onto this journey of especially astrology, I guess. And because the funny thing about us is that we're both evolutionary astrologers, and that's kind of a niche in astrology. And we are born not so many days apart either.
Yeah.
So that's funny. But how did you come across maybe first evolutionary astrology?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I was reflecting on this question, knowing that we were going to have this conversation, and so I was looking back, trying to kind of decipher when I really got interested in astrology, and I came to the conclusion that my interest in astrology is actually much bigger than just astrology. It's more based in the an interest in our soul,
Yeah.
in the what is the nature of the human soul and life and death in particular. And I think I've always been kind of interested, knowing in myself that I believe that the life that we're having right now is not the beginning and it's not the end, that it's a one blip and a much longer timeline of our experience as a soul. And I've known that my whole life, but I didn't really have a whole lot of um, other people talking about it, number one, but also just resources that would help me connect even more deeply with this knowing that I already had, but I wanted to know more. I wanted to know more. Why are we here? What is our purpose? All of these big kind of existential questions. And so that's really what led me to my interest in astrology, because I always had this sense that if we can tap into the bigger picture of how everything's kind of interconnected, we might get some clarity as to why we're here in the first place.
Yeah.
Um, so it's bigger for me than just just astrology. There's like a bigger picture. It's like
For
connecting
sure.
with the universe, basically, and connecting with our soul.
For sure. I mean, astrology is just the implications of that, right? It's just pointing to that larger reality. But I'm curious, when you say you've always known this, did your parents tell you? Like, how have you always known this?
Yeah, no. My parents really, they're not people who are thinking about this kind of thing necessarily. And so I can trace it back to my teenage years, and feeling like I had a difficult time as a teenager, as a lot of people do, as far as feeling depressed. I had um, a lot of things going on, a lot of despair. And I connect a lot of that with feeling very like feeling this sense of like, there's a bigger picture, but I just don't know what it is, like this feeling of disconnect from my own soul. And so, I was always interested in astrology, but even, up into college, I was kind of trying to find evolutionary astrology. I now know what I was trying to find, but I couldn't find it, right? I was like, all of the astrological things I would come across felt very flippant and, like very surface level. I wasn't really interested in just looking at the personality. It just wasn't what I was looking for. Pop astrology wasn't it. And then it wasn't actually until my daughter died, which was a big turning point in my life, because death in particular, death has always been something that's been on my radar, right? What has it is for most people. I mean, it's a big thing. It's something we're all going to experience. And it's scary in a lot of ways, but death in particular for me has just always been like, what happens after we die? Is it the end? I don't think so. Reincarnation, all of these big questions have always been loomed very large in my mind. And so when I actually had the experience of being with my daughter, who I love very much, and was able to kind of midwife her through her death and be very intimately how do I want to say it? Just right there with death.
Yeah. It's almost as if you're talking about a sort of initiation for her, or like a ritual to go to the other side, sort of a process for that.
Yeah, like holding space for that, holding
Yeah.
space for that. Um, it started a process for me where synchronistically I kind of came into contact with all that I needed to come into contact with astrology and other symbol systems too. At that time, I started using tarot much more intentionally as well.
Mm-hmm.
But at that after she died, I actually started to. I had my first astrology reading. I was connected with Stephen Forrest, which is my main teacher.
Yeah.
Um, consider him my primary teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it kind of opened up all the doors for me that I needed to actually connect with astrology in a way that feels deep and meaningful.
Ah, it is. It's so interesting to hear this. And yeah, it's really a match to evolutionary astrology's philosophy anyway around how it opens us up these huge losses
Yes.
and breakdowns that it opens us up. And also I can't help but mirror myself in what you're saying about always having had this, and we are from that generation of, or I guess the Pluto and Scorpio generation, and then maybe the sub generation of Saturn and Uranus in Sagittarius. And
Mhm.
both of us also have Mars in Sagittarius. I also have the moon there. So I feel
Yeah.
like I'm kind of the winner here in terms of
Yeah. Yeah.
of how much Sagittarius. But but you're doing fine.
Yeah.
You're, you're doing fine because that is really about how is it all connected? What's the point of life? You can go there
Yeah.
with your mind. What's the point? And the need to make meaning. And then of course with the Scorpio energy is the death. And how are you now with that? Because that is such a huge loss. And the reason why I even feel we can talk about it, you've said that to me before, and also
Yeah.
on your website, you're very open about having lost your daughter.
Yes.
Um, where are you with it now, with this loss?
Yeah. So I'm coming up on the 10-year anniversary in March. So in
Wow.
a few weeks. Um, it's been a journey, because I conceptualize it as kind of having two layers to the journey. Like one is the very immediate physical embodiment of grief as a mother. I mean, there's been that journey, which has been difficult. I mean, it was my experience with grief in my life. Grief was my biggest fear. Loss of someone I loved was my biggest fear. And so when she was diagnosed with cancer, and when she was diagnosed, I actually already knew, in retrospect, on a soul level, not on a um, rational level, that our time together was going to be quite short. So
Wow.
when I conceived her, there was just this sense of like, I need to be present with every single moment because this is precious. And now looking back, I realized that that was a knowing that this was something, this was not going to be a situation where I get to see my child live a long life and I, they outlive me. That's not going to be the situation here. Um, um, I'm trying to remember where I was going with that.
Yeah, I think you were going to, and this is something my mind does as well, going to this, that's on the, I don't know if it's on the material level, but like as a mother grieving,
Yeah.
also
Yes.
having
Yes.
known that, but then I'm sensing something else also comes in a,
Yeah. Yeah, the two layers. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. There was the layer of grief, and then there's the transpersonal layer, which was also there for me the entire time, which was very, very helpful throughout the entire process. Because even when she was sick and we were in the hospital, we lived in the hospital for 7 months together in a locked unit because she had
God.
no immune system, and so I was around dying children the entire time. And so the whole experience was just gut wrenching. But there was this deeper layer of knowing in me, and I do think of it on a soul level, that I knew that she and we had a soul contract to go through this
Yeah.
together. And
Yeah.
I believe there's all different reasons why that is, for both of our souls, you know.
Yeah.
Like I think we were both benefiting from that on a soul level, right? And then there's the actual physical embodied level that's just, you know, horrific and painful in all these different ways. But having those two, being kind of aware of the transpersonal level of that really helped me navigate the experience with some level of grace and an ability to hold my own grief in the bigger container of understanding what our souls were kind of working on together through that.
Yeah.
And so in that, and now 10 years later, I mean, that still holds true for me, that I believe that there's a much bigger picture to this, and it's helped in my grieving process tremendously to have a bigger framework for understanding why all of that happened.
For
Yeah.
sure, for sure. Yeah, yeah. Well, it does for me as well with different losses and looking at birth charts around
Yes.
people,
Mhm.
places, situations in life, and making some sense of it, even though we don't know exactly, but
Yeah.
it's a way to kind of feel that you at least have a glimpse of the truth, to think
Yes.
like that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that, you know, whenever we incarnate into a human body, we forget our brain is only, you know, it's like our brain is only capable of so much and holding so much and understanding so much. And um, there's some level of forgetting that we just have to do in order to step into our life fully and be here in the physical plane. Um, but I think as we get older, it's ideal if we're intentionally working with our path that we start to remember these things. And for me, one of those moments of like big remembering was when my daughter was diagnosed, and I was just it was almost just, I mean, I think that our souls started to communicate. I think when I conceived her, our souls were already communicating because I felt different. I felt a difference. But when she was diagnosed, I think that there was a lot of soul communication. Like I think she was actually reminding me of why we were going through all of this. And um, astrology, one of the reasons why I got into studying astrology is because I really wanted to help other people connect with that knowing in themselves as well. Like connect with their meaning and purpose, connect with the fact that there is a bigger picture that we're all part of. And astrology is so good for that because, I mean, there's no rational linear explanation as to why the planets at the moment of our birth should reflect us,
No.
you know, our psyche so beautifully, unless there's something larger, less linear, interconnected happening, right? So,
Exactly, and this whole individualized way of looking at, I mean, there's many beautiful things about being individuals, but the way of saying this is your issue and this is your fault, and I'm kind of assuming here that if we're in this generation of Pluto and Scorpio, we felt ashamed of certain things
yeah,
at a very deep level, and I think partly that has to do with the perception that this is all on me. And even when you share a personal story like that, I'm also connecting to the reality that, but this can happen for everyone. It's laid out before us. It's right there in the birth chart. So I can't really make it just about me, and I can't take, in a way, I can't take full responsibility either. Something came before me.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, it's really, that's one of the reasons why evolutionary astrology speaks to me so much, is because it actually gives some kind of framework for understanding why or how we come into this lifetime already having these signatures in our person, you know, these wounds, basically. Like, where does this come from? And that bigger framework, really, that's why it works for me, because it's there's something much bigger going on than just the biographical realities of the life that we are experiencing right now.
Exactly. So I want to talk to you about how you work with it, because just as I was saying that, I'm thinking, in therapy, it's all about agency and,
Yeah.
owning up to this is now your responsibility to change. But then having that other factor is kind of also freeing to see that it's not, I mean, you're not in control.
Yes. Right. There's so much that is it's so much, there's so much that we're handed,
Yeah.
like the energies that we're handed. And it's like our soul, I believe that our soul probably made choices. There is like on a soul level, I think there's agency whenever we make decisions about what lifetimes we're going to come into or whatever it may be. But like that doesn't really mean much to us here in our bodies that we're in right now, because we didn't have any say in this, right? And so, yeah, it's like we're given these energies, but then there's the agency piece of it, is like what are you going to do with these energies in this lifetime? Right. And that's
Yes.
where the empowering piece is for me, is the more you understand what you've been given and what energies you're working with, what archetypes you're working with, and then like the lower unconscious kind of shadowy version of that, like how we can get, caught up in things that are not going to be conducive to growth, and if we understand how it can look if it's going well, where we're actually intentionally working with ourselves, looking at the shadow, understanding ourselves, we can more intentionally craft a life that is in alignment, true alignment with who we intended to be in this
Yeah.
life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
In alignment with that soul journey that we can see from the birth chart. So okay, let me because you don't have a long time, so
I know. I know. Yeah.
certain questions that I want to get in here.
Yeah.
Uh, how do you combine astrology and therapy? Or do you offer it as separate sessions?
Yep. Yeah. So I combine it, and I offer it separately and combined. So I keep my therapy and my astrology websites separate, but I link them so
Yeah.
that people can know that I'm a therapist if they're finding my astrology website, and know that I'm an astrologer if they're finding my therapy website. And so I offer astrology readings, which are just separate, from any kind of therapeutic relationship. But in my therapy, in everything I do bring astrology in. If
Right.
people are interested, right? If they're
Mm.
not interested, I do have clients that are not interested, and that's totally fine. Totally fine. But ones that are interested, and most are, I find that most people who come to work with me, one of the reasons they're coming to work with me is because they're interested in the astrology piece of it.
Yeah.
And the way that I work it into therapy, there's no like it's not the same for everybody. It really depends on, I follow my own intuition with it. I let them follow their intuition with it. And it can be, for some people, it might be very central, where we're looking at the chart in the beginning, and then we dive into like the actual therapeutic relationship and getting to know each other, and the issues that they're bringing to therapy. And then other times, it'll just be something I look at before we meet, and then the actual content of our sessions is more therapeutic, and we're just working through their presenting issues. And then I'll bring in things that I see in the chart to kind of help them flesh out an understanding of what they may be experiencing, like a bigger picture, right? Like helping them paint a bigger picture for why they may be experiencing what they're experiencing. Um,
That is so
yeah.
interesting to hear. So I do mostly the last thing you mentioned, but without the taking in the astrology. So I actually have as a condition for people if they want to work therapeutically with me that I need to be able to see their birth chart.
Oh, I love
So
that.
yeah, they can have their birth time or not, but I just wanna have an overall, because that's how I feel confident,
Yes.
and in that I can actually help. But as of until now, I haven't blended it like that. So in
Yeah.
therapy, I haven't said something because I've been practicing a certain method, but I'm almost done with that education. So now I'm at this point where let's see, because there are many ways to go. I'm really realizing that, and I think that's also very present in the Sagittarius archetype, that there is so much to explore. And in terms of, a Sagittarian therapist would use a lot of different techniques, I think. Don't you think?
Yeah. Yeah. Like eclectic. Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of bringing in a lot of different things. Yeah, totally. I'm that way too.
Yeah. So I am
Yes.
starting to kind of direct it towards the client, using a little bit of, different methods, um, but it's, I think, and I'm curious if you think so too. There's that issue with taking in astrology in a therapy session, is that if it sounds like now this is the expert coming in and saying this is how it is, I think
Yeah.
that's why I'm hesitant to do exactly that.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it is really tricky because it's two different roles. They're very different roles.
Yeah.
Like being an astrologer, we are imparting quote unquote wisdom or information, right? Like, and maybe it's
Yes.
not even, it's just information. We know a language, someone's coming to us and they're like, translate this language that I don't know that you know, and tell me what you see, right?
Yeah.
And that does put us in this like role of expert in that particular realm. And then with therapy, we don't want to ever really be in the place of telling a client what's best for them or what they're doing. And so it is really tricky. And, one of the ways that I navigate that is that I always preface it with, in the language of astrology, this is how this would be spoken about. Like, for instance, like in your chart, I see your sun in this sign and this archetype. This is one language, one way of speaking about this. And I always ask if they think it would be helpful to hear this, and then we process what that means for them. But I always preface it as like, this is one way of looking at it, one language, and one way of speaking about this, and if it resonates with you, it resonates with you, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. It's not going to resonate with everybody. And it's kind of like, that's where the agency piece comes in, where it's like every single one of us, I think, is trying to figure out what works for us and what doesn't. And I'm a true believer in like, take what works and don't just forget about what doesn't, because there's a million different ways to reconnect with our soul in this lifetime. And evolutionary astrology is not going to be the thing for everybody, you know?
No, for sure. For
Yeah.
sure. So yeah, that's really interesting. So, but that's when you do therapy and then you draw on astrology, but then you also have astrology sessions. For me, after, because I started with astrology and then therapy came next.
Yeah.
For me now, doing an ordinary astrology session is challenging, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah. How so? I'm curious because yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just
What is an ordinary one like for you? I
yeah.
guess I should ask. Yeah.
Well, I'm also a Stephen Forrest fan for sure. Who's not? And but also Jeffrey Wolfgreen, and I've studied with Maurice Fernandez, who studied with both of them. So I'm
I
a
don't know what was the last name? I know Jeffrey Wolfgreen, but
yeah.
what is the
Maurice Fernandez is the one that I've certified by a
Okay.
diploma course, and so he has a certain way of doing it that I've been practicing. Um, but of course, after you've taken the education, it's up to you, right?
Yeah, your own methods and like how yeah.
And so I am feeling that how helpful is this? Stephen Forrest talks a lot about that. The whole reason we're doing this is to be helpful, right?
Yeah.
And uh, yeah, so yeah, I don't know if I can say much more. But maybe you have to put some words in there. It's just that I'm feeling I want if things needs to change for someone, it's just not
Yeah.
enough that I'm telling you about your south node and the rulers
Yeah.
of it, and of course the meaning of that. But I really want people to come to therapy afterwards, after an
Yes.
astrology session. That's what I prefer, because then we can
Yeah.
actually change things.
Absolutely. That's yes. You know, I agree 100% that that is the ideal. That's why I love astrology and therapy and bringing them together, because it's like um doing a doing therapy without an astrological chart is like flying blind, right? Now that I know how to speak the language of astrology, um, it's tricky though. It's intuitive, right? So everybody's going to read charts differently, and that's one of the things where it's just like we can't really hold ourselves as like an expert. We really have to not make sure we don't do that, because if we do that, um, how do we know the way we're interpreting it is right?
Yeah,
Right? Like, so it's very tricky to make sure that we're navigating this in an ethical way, and also um, holding really lightly to the idea that we really know anything we don't really know anything for sure. Like, these are all just kind of explorations with the client about who they are and what, because I think our soul knows when we hear something true about ourselves,
yeah,
if we're in touch, if we can tap into that. So really encouraging clients to tap into like what feels true for them. Um, I agree though with just the astrology readings, because I think that a lot of times, people come for an astrology reading, they hear everything in the reading, and it's kind of an overload because it's so much that they're
Yes.
getting thrown at them. And ideally, like I record my astrology readings. I don't know if you do that,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
the reason we do that is so that you can go back and listen to it again, because I expect, and I'm sure you expect too, for them to make like for 10% what I say to actually make it in, and
yeah,
hopefully they'll go back and listen to that. And I kind of trust that the unfolding of their life's path, um, it will unfold as it's meant to, right? And maybe as the reader of their chart, I am the person that's supposed to introduce like a certain concept, and then hopefully it will bring them further along in their journey, and you know, it'll unfold as it may. But ideally, they would go and then process that with somebody and really be able to work with what I've said, and like you're saying, with therapy, whether it's with me or someone else.
yeah. I think what plays into it is also what role you're comfortable in. And I think for me, it's just I can help so much more if you keep coming for a little
Absolutely.
while.
Yes. That's how I am too. With my therapy clients, I require them to come weekly.
Yeah,
That's an that's my requirement, and that's why I have that requirement, because I'm just like it is literally in the time that we log together, the hours that we log together, where we can kind of work with, because so much of that is these neuro pathways that need to be kind of rewired, and that requires repetition. And we're talking on like the physiological level now, but
yeah, the micro regulations.
yes, yes, yep.
For sure, yeah. So yeah, I have either every week or every other week, and I definitely feel the difference. And especially when there's been cancellations and stuff, it's like but it's so nice to have that frequency, often frequency.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yep. Yep.
Okay, so I'm just gonna keep
Yeah. Go on.
throwing questions
Yeah.
at you. Okay, so I'm curious because of our birth charts and the similarities. We are very different persons, no doubt about
Yeah.
it. But you've seen mine now as well, right? So there's a lot of generational repetition, and also some house placements of the nodes and stuff like that. But
Yes.
have you felt that you were a therapist before you actually became a therapist?
Yeah. You mean like just like my personality and how I was
Yes.
oriented toward people? Yes. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Always being the person people come to talk to, just holding space. I honestly have come to believe about myself, and I don't know if you feel like this too, but it's like my husband was telling me the other day, he's just like, you're just and I hesitate to say this because it feels like egoic or something. I don't know. There's something about this that feels a little uncomfortable, but he's like, you're just a healer. That's what you do. You hold
Yes.
space for people, like no matter what you're doing. It doesn't matter if you're a therapist or you're an astrologer or you're doing tarot readings, or if you're just playing with a child. But it's just like and I do feel like that. I
Yeah.
feel that. It's just I want to hold healing space for people. And so, yeah, and I see you shaking your head, so I'm assuming that you kind of
Yes.
resonate with that. Yeah,
Not shaking, nodding my head.
nodding your head. Yeah, they won't be able to
I'm
see it.
completely agreeing. Yeah. Yeah, no, I love the healer. I've come back to that sometimes. Like, what is it? What is the common denominator for all the threats that I'm doing? It is that healing effect. But I am thinking that you are a Cancer rising,
Yes, and I'm trying to remember what your rising sign was.
Leo, Leo, and
Yeah.
so
Oh yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah.
so yeah. So through life, I have tended to go into a little bit more of a funny mode and wanting to entertain people, and I guess that's why I'm doing this as well. But that sometimes have my inside feeling of actually being an in-depth psychologist. That could be my inside feeling. I'm not, but that's kind of that's how I feel. That has not always been seen.
Yes, yeah, a parent. Yeah, on the
Exactly.
outside. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, absolutely.
And I'm still going through training as a therapist, but I'm so impatient because I feel I am. That's what I am. Can't you see it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's like you already are it, and now you're
Yes,
just trying to check the boxes to be able to do it. Yeah,
exactly. That's what I feel. Okay,
yeah.
that's
Oh,
nice
I
with
felt it. Yeah.
recognition. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when I look at your websites, I sense a theme. I sense several themes, but is there a particular theme around wanting to help people get out of people pleasing and codependency, kind of the Libra archetype?
Yes.
Why is that?
Yeah. Um, Part of it is my own wounding, right? That was kind of my, as a Cancer rising, South Node in the fourth house. There's been a lot of hiding in my life, wanting to hide in the crab shell. Um, and my sun is in Aries, right, in the 10th house, and my Venus is in Aries in the 10th house. And so there's been a lot of push-pull within me of kind of feeling like I want to be out and seen and then like in hiding. But I think that, I have a lot of karmic history, I think, of being in situations where um, I'm just going to call it pathological altruism. I know that's kind of like a big word, but
That
pathological
is
altruism,
that is really
where
good. I'm a
we're getting,
Pisces, so I get that.
yes,
Instantly, I get it.
yeah, right. And people that get it.
Yeah.
I say that, and people that know, they're like, oh, yeah. So like the self-forgetting that comes, and my Mercury is in Pisces, and so I also have like a Piscean kind of perspective on life. And so compassion comes really, really easily for me. And it comes really easily for my clients as well. Compassion for other people. And sometimes that compassion gets out of control. You can see that in my chart. I have Neptune square my sun, so Sun and Neptune, Sun is going to be the ego, and Neptune is ego dissolution in some ways. And then my moon is square my Mars. And so moon, I mean, it's wanting to nurture, and Mars is more self-preservation, So I have a lot of going on in my own personality where the experience for me has been one of self-forgetting a lot of times, like my compassion overriding any kind of self-preservation. And so a lot of the people that I work with, I'm helping them get back in touch with their healthy self-protective mechanisms, because for whatever reason, whether that's past life trauma, this life trauma, usually probably a combination of both, that's led them, and just our wiring, innate wiring. Compassion is a wonderful thing, but when it goes overboard and then we are no longer extending compassion and protection to ourselves, like that's a problem. And so the people that I work with pretty much across the board have that issue. And a lot of them have found themselves in relationship with narcissistic or very, very self-centered people who mean to do them harm, either consciously or unconsciously, through manipulation and gaslighting. And if we are wired in the way that I'm talking about, where we are very compassionate, we're very conscientious, we're very willing to look at ourselves to see if we're part of the problem. If we're really wired in that way, we are vulnerable to manipulation from other people. And a lot of people I work with have experienced that kind of wounding. And so we're working with that kind of trauma as well.
Is it people find you because of this, or is it just that you attract those kind of clients?
I think it's both. Yeah, I think it's both. I think it's both. I think that there's a synchronicity. I really believe as therapists, there's a synchronicity as far as like our clients finding the therapists that they need. And a lot of times that reflects what we've been through ourselves, kind of Chiron, like the wounded healer,
Yes.
like I've healed myself and now I can help others go through a similar path. Um, but I also market myself very specifically to that population. So trying to make it so that they can find me, as well as so they can recognize me as that.
I am for sure one of those. I mean, and I think again we have to refer to the Pluto in Scorpio generation when you talk
Yeah.
about manipulation, when we talk about gaslighting, and somehow getting caught up too deeply in something that's not, well, it's not self-reliant for sure. So I guess the opposite is codependence.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
and and so what I mean, and so part of it is the generation, the people we attract, and then there's also a piece of it. It doesn't apply to everyone. I think we can see that a lot of also females are very strong and out there, and it's not an issue for them. But there is part of it in culture as well, right?
Yeah.
About that it's difficult to to be really honest and not
Yeah,
fear losing the other person, for example.
absolutely.
So,
Yes.
how do you work with that with your clients and with yourself?
Yeah. Well, in particular, you mean like the fear of losing relationship if we're setting boundaries?
Yeah, that's kind of my thinking that that is the fear, but maybe you have other takes on
Yes.
it.
Yeah, well, it is. I think it is one of the biggest fears. And one of the things that I tell my clients, and I really believe this, is that boundaries always make relationships better at the end of the day. In the beginning, it can be really hard when we first start setting boundaries, when we haven't been setting boundaries for ourselves in the past, because we are constantly teaching people how to treat us, even if we're doing it. I mean, usually we're not just explicitly telling people what we want and what we don't want. A lot of times we're just sending messages, implicitly. And so if they are expecting us to never have any boundaries and then we start setting them and saying no, and having and actually sharing our preferences, people often don't respond well to that. It's a shock to them. And so it can feel really scary because we can feel like we're going to lose people that are important to us. But what often, and sometimes we do, right? Sometimes we do. But I would say that if we lose relationships because we're being authentic to ourselves and protecting ourselves, those relationships were not great relationships to begin with.
For sure, but I'm noticing this pattern in the most subtle of ways,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's the example that I gave about not maybe being honest in the moment, but actually, it's it kind of happens without my knowing. Do you see what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? It's like it's afterwards. I'm like, why did I agree to all of that? And so in the moment when I say yes, sometimes I'm able to be aware of it in the moment, but it's still a struggle to ask for something else. For example,
Absolutely. Yes. One thing that comes up for me when you say that is and I'm sure that I don't know if this is kind of in your training or not, but the fawn response. You heard of the fawn
I have,
response?
yeah, FAWN, right? Fawning,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So it's
No,
like, we have the trauma responses: fight, flight, freeze, which most people are pretty familiar with. If our body registers danger in the environment, we might want to fight, we might want to freeze, and we might want to flee. But there's also fawning, which is the please and appease response. And so I actually think of it as a nervous system response that we don't actually have a whole lot of control over all the time, because we don't get to really choose how our nervous system tries to keep us safe. It's so instantaneous. And so when you say that, that's what comes to mind is it's a fawn response. It's kind of like this training in our brain. It's like has learned, in order to stay safe, the safest thing I can do relationally is just please and appease. It's like just a knee-jerk
yes.
please and appease reaction. And so one way we start working with that is kind of like you're saying, like just bringing our awareness to it, observing ourselves in those moments. And eventually we'll get to the point where, like you're saying, a lot of times I know about it in the moment. Well, we'll get more and more conscious of ourselves in the moment of the fawn response as it's happening.
I love that image. I love that it is so automatic and in the nervous system, as you say.
Yeah.
And so it's a trauma response, I hear.
Yeah. The trauma response thing, because what like culturally and societally, when we talk about trauma, we always think of big traumas, but it doesn't have to be big traumas. Like when we a lot of our families, and I don't know how it is in Denmark, and it might be similar in the United States. um it's very common for families to have enmeshed boundaries, which means emotional enmeshment, where people are everybody's kind of trying to take care of everybody else's feelings. People aren't really being direct. It's kind of just a learned behavior a lot of times. And if you are too direct, you might be punished for that, right?
Yes.
It's culturally, especially with parents, like the way that children are treated by parents. And so oftentimes our nervous system does have trauma around relational trauma around being direct. Like we've gotten the message subtly or in some ways, sometimes not subtle ways, that it's not okay to be too direct. And so this is just an example. I give that example because it's one where it's like I think it affects a lot of people and they don't even think of it as trauma, but it actually is relational trauma.
For sure, for sure. I'm totally picking up on that when you talk about it. Yes, I had to schedule a doctor's appointment this morning, and she was like, "Oh, there's a couple of weeks until," and then the first date she mentions, the first time I'm like, "Yes."
Yeah.
I just hear myself saying yes, and agreeing to it, because I think subconsciously, transliminally, somewhere
Yes.
beneath the surface, I was thinking I don't want to be difficult, and I've already, I know they're busy on the phone, so
Yes.
something like that. Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah. It's like you don't take up too much space.
yeah. But it's
Yes.
it's it is really interesting when it's not something you actually think about in the moment. It's just it comes out, and yeah, I agree. It seems like for me, it seems like a nervous system thing.
Yes.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Because in that moment, if you're really tapping in somatically to what's going on, there might be some activation, like some like you were saying, like that concern about, I don't want to take up too much of her time. I know she's busy. Like there's concern about taking up space, taking up having needs, you know.
Yeah.
And these things I do think come from our experience in childhood, but also, with the bigger picture of talking about evolutionary astrology, like I think it sometimes is even bigger than that, because I don't know if you see this or not, but whenever I look at people's charts, it's almost inevitable that the South Node, I do think of it as talking about, South Node and Pluto in different areas of the chart, talking about past life wounds, but it almost always reflects this life as well, like
Yes.
the first couple decades of life, or, and so these patterns, we can think of it as just being in childhood, but that's another thing that's really interesting about this, is that when we're working through intergenerational trauma, and but I think it's actually much bigger than just our family in this lifetime.
For sure. Oh my God, the minutes are sneaking up on us. But that I would love to have you back and actually just do a whole one on that, because that is that yeah, it is both. It I think again what you were saying before about the loss of your daughter and processing that, there's one level, and then there's another level. That's it's sort of the same thing. You need to go through the process with the emotions you have repressed, maybe that are stuck in you from that childhood you actually had, but then you can also conceptualize it and make meaning of it and be freer around that trauma, uh, to
Absolutely.
to have this knowledge of prior lives.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that you're bringing that piece back around of the transpersonal, or kind of the soul level understanding, and then the physical embodied experience that we're just having as human beings. Because I think one of the risks with astrology is, in any kind of spiritual system or any kind of symbol system, is spiritual bypassing, where you just want to just focus on the
Yeah.
spiritual and not feel any of the feelings. And really, the only way to heal is to do both. And so that's
Yes.
another reason why astrology and therapy, it's just so wonderful, because therapy is
Exactly.
actually feeling the feelings that you're having, and learning to be with them and actually processing that trauma, and not just skipping that step and having just like a intellectual understanding.
Yeah, then you got the explanation. Bye bye, right?
Exactly.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's a huge revelation once you get it. And I started personally at least in evolutionary astrology, that is Stephen Forrest, where I started. And just that, whoa, it opens up your world. But then you kind of find yourself, at least for me, I found myself in that symbolism, the darker symbolism of the South Node again and
Yeah.
again. You
Yeah.
know, so more is needed, if you ask me.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. You can't think your way out of it. That, because our body holds the trauma, our body holds trauma, and you actually have to process the trauma. Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Maggie. I need to take a screenshot of us, okay? Are you ready?
Yes.
Oh, God. Maybe I'm forgetting how to do it. Just a moment. But can you take one at your end?
Yeah, I think so. Let me try. Yes, I
This is how
can. Yeah.
professional I am.
Oh, well, I don't care.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Oh my gosh. Wonderful connecting with you. Stay in touch
Yeah,
if you will.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for watching the time and wrapping up on time. I'm impressed.
Yeah, your moon in Virgo is what I'm trying to impress here.
Virgo, yeah. Thank you. That's funny.
I will of course link to Maggie's websites, and maybe we get to meet you again on here. Who knows?
Great. All right. Thank you.